Okay, fine.
Yeah. I know a lot about Sega just intrinsically. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you and Sega, you guys go hand in hand.
One is...
A bird and the bees were two in the bush.
I was going to say, we know each other like the back of our own hand job.
Ayo.
That's the saying, right? Because you get a hand job on the back end, this is good marketing.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
What's blue and pisses over everything? Sonic the Hedgehog.
Gross. Could you imagine if he was proportionate to like a traditional hedgehog in all forms and fashions?
I think that would be adorable. Because you just see him in like Sonic Land with little like feet.
But he would also impale his own penis.
Ouch.
Hedgehogs do that.
Is their dick just so long it like circles around them and it hits their spikes?
Well, when they curl.
Oh, I was gonna say, or is it like a walrus where you see? Remember that footage of the walrus blowing itself?
No. Why would I remember that?
Because I remember seeing it and I was like, God damn!
What are you watching, John?
It's like, you're gonna need a garbage bag to wrap that shit up.
Oh my god!
And it's funny too because he's like in an aquarium, so kids are like looking at it. It's like, dude, put that away.
Oh, hi everybody! Now that you've heard about
the wonders of nature,
Mother Nature in the form of a penis.
If you are an avid penis entomologist.
A penile entomologist.
I thought I did it fine, but okay. Just one-upsmanship, that's fine.
No, I had to gamer card you on nature. Because it's nature.
We're humans. We've gamer carded nature to death.
Accurate statement.
Yeah.
So, I'm James. I'm going first.
And I'm John. Welcome to the only podcast that talks about global warming.
So,
the only current events podcast.
If you were with us last week,
What's wrong with you?
Wait, what? That's a great segue for if you were with us last week.
Yeah.
So if you were with us last week, we kind of talked about the best year in gaming, arguably, in 1998. Hopefully we'll get another 1998 in the form of maybe a 2028. It happens every 30 years.
Because we've done 2017 so far, and we also did 1998. I think those 2 years just... rapid fire, quick memory are like the two best years we've had.
So this week, I had my big brain moment, and this is a shout out to John, by the way. So before I tell you what we're talking about this week, my hot fire review is a game Martha beat.
Can we both do reviews this week?
Of course.
Cool.
Absolutely. It's our podcast. We can do what we want.
You're right.
Cue, whatever, I do what I want. By James, not Cartman this time.
For whatever reason, I was going to say we cut to I Can Show You the World, but the only song I thought of was Look at This Stuff, Isn't It Neat? I'm like, wait, why am I thinking of that song?
Oh, man. But so Martha actually beat Jurassic World Evolution 2.
Isn't that like a
it's
Animal Crossing?
No, kind of, but no. More along the lines of SimCities with natural disasters,
okay,
power, stuff like that.
Okay.
So it's basically...
So you can beat those games.
Jurassic World SimCity, essentially. And Martha beat through the story mode, and she just... Here recently, this past weekend, she started up on the challenges and stuff. So she's building... you get to not just see the typical Jurassic Park dinosaurs. It actually goes through true history of, oh, by the way, this predated the Stegosaurus. It's this is this.
We're not just talking about the Jurassic period. We're talking about the Mesozoic period and the
Cretaceous
and the Tetramino period.
The Tetris period where all dinosaurs were tetroids.
Oh my god. Tetraminos.
Yo, that'd be kind of a cool game.
Cold War dinosaur.
Yo, developers, if you are listening to us, where I know one of you...
We know you are.
One of you has to be a developer or have connections in some form or fashion. Tetris, the MMO, where everything is a tetrai, and you have to fight other tetrais with Tetris swords.
They've already made that. It's called Tetris 99. Anyway.
Fair. But no, Martha beat it. She's been enjoying it. I got to help her out in a few places and actually, dive into a little bit. It was a very enjoyable game. For all of you people who are waiting for the next Sims style game to drop, if you enjoy the Jurassic Park franchise in any form or fashion, this is a wonderful way to kind of experience it firsthand, manage a park, and just have a good time.
It's like Roller Coaster Tycoon or Sim City or Theme Park or whatever, but you have dinosaurs.
Exactly. Who doesn't love dinos?
That's cool. That's a cool concept by its own description. That's a cool idea. Run a dinosaur theme park and do it correctly.
So from Martha and James, not John because he hasn't played it yet, obviously.
I'm
he doesn't
one of those
like
few people that hates dinosaurs.
Play it.
Yeah.
Shout out to anybody if this is recording.
Yes, it is.
Yay! Shout out to social media managers because holy moly, does running an Instagram page, doing reels, trying to be creative and cute with posts and kitschy and all that, it is time consuming. It is a second job, man.
I like how social media manager, aka human being.
They're not always human. AIs can do it now, I bet.
AI is going to replace everything.
Did you see the AIs that you can let paint and they're just, it's ridiculous?
The AI generated art stuff is terrifying at the same time really gross. So I try to just stay away from that entire side of the internet. Like, especially being an artist myself and being a creative type, it's like, this isn't going to replace genuine people, but it's going to convince others that it can, and that's what makes me annoyed. But you had your time to review a video game, so I'm going to review my own game that I played over the past couple of days.
Ooh.
In preparation for the launch of Splatoon 3, I decided to play the DLC expansion for Splatoon 2, the Octo expansion, where you play as an octopus in the Deep Sea Metro, and it's all sorts of fun stuff, right?
Okay.
It came out a few years ago, and I think I didn't buy it then because I was kind of curious. I was like, meh about it, but I finally sat down and play it, and I'm stumbling over my words because that made me very upset. That entire DLC.
So you did not like that. I was expecting some happy moments here, but no, you hated it.
It was so hot and cold. There's just this interesting fundamental misunderstanding that Nintendo seems to have what's fun about their games. And I know that I was really critical back when 2017 when Splatoon 2 launched, because it was more of the same and a lot of the same problems were still existing and a lot of things were made worse. And this will actually tie into an upcoming article I'm writing for our blog, where I basically just do a postmortem on the first two Splatoon games in preparation for 3. I want to actually have an episode, if we can, where I kind of eulogize those two games. So that's me putting stuff out there in the future. But again, more content to come. I'm going to focus wholly on what I played. Octo Expansion is supposed to be more single-player content for Splatoon 2, and that promise was fun. But the problem is that their idea of more stuff is taking a shooter game and turning it into a puzzle game, and that made me very angry. Because there are some of those puzzles are just not fun.
You hear that? That's the sound of people who want to play puzzles in their shooters. Let me tell you, that's no one.
The Venn diagram of two people. And so for me, I can tell you why I don't like that. I can tell you what makes that game fun to me. But apparently Nintendo thinks very otherwise, and there's one level in the game where you have to recreate a design out of breakable boxes using guns, and aiming in that game is already horrific, so trying to be precise in any capacity just sucks. And by the end of it, I had done all of the base levels, and I was ready for it to just be over. And I'm like, okay, I want the story. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to shoot things and play the story mode. Let's just do that. Then it reveals a stealth segment where you don't even have a gun in your shooting game. And you can tell that they were really proud of their game design by basically making it so that if you die 5 times, or if you're like me, who was just so fed up with it, killed themselves 5 times, to just skip the levels. Because I'm aware of what happens later in the game. I'll put a spoiler warning, mild here, for people who actually give a shit, because this came out 3 years ago, probably longer. You fight Agent 3, who is from the first game, who is a squid character who is the main hero of the first game. You fight him, and I'm like, that's the interesting part to me. That's the thing I want to actually play. And it's like pulling teeth to get to the fun part of their game. I said it at the top. It's a very fundamental misunderstanding of what makes Splatoon fun, and it just frustrated me to no end. And by the time it was over, I'm like, thank God. At least I got to freaking shoot and throw some paint everywhere. That's the fun part of your game, not freaking everything. there's challenges in it where it's like, you have a limited amount of ink, use it wisely. I'm like, no, the whole point of Splatoon is to throw paint around and make a big old mess. Why are you being like, be careful? That's the opposite of fun.
So this gets a certified, don't play it.
Yeah.
There's only 2 ratings, play it and don't play it.
No nuance. It's black and white. This is the internet, baby.
Exactly.
So honestly, don't play it. It's funny because I'm still glad I played it, because I got to experience it. And the things that I did want, I did kind of get out of it. But it ties into a lot of things that I just genuinely don't like about Nintendo's ideas on game design. And that will come off in the article I'm writing. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, that's what I did my Saturday. And my voice was actually hoarse from screaming at my TV for being so goddamn sick of what I was doing.
So it's actually a perfect segueable moment into our topic for this week.
Let's talk about a good game company.
So Nintendo dominated the market for quite some time. You had your Ataris, you had the TurboGrafx eventually, you had like a few things, testing the waters, the PC Engine, things like that.
Yeah, PC Engine and TurboGrafx both being NEC.
But
both being the same console.
Yep. But when we come back, we're actually going to give you a wonderful moment in gaming history. I'm going to give a special shout out to the gaming historian. Your videos inspired the idea for this that I pitched to John, and John is like, yeah, let's do this. Also, both of us were probably in our heads like, why didn't we do this before? Because this is John's wheelhouse. We're going to go over the history of Sega. I wanted to do the chime, but I was trying to be polite.
I appreciate that greatly, because I saw it in your eyes, and then that's why I had to mad dog you. Again, that doesn't put the lost sound effect in there. You're editing this one. Put the lost sound effect in there that I used when I friggin' threatened to break Cloud, and we're golden. But yeah, we're going to go over the history of Sega of America, their rise to prominence in the 90s, and their fall from grace / did they really? Yes, but, whatever. TLD, too long didn't listen. Yes and no. You'll find out more about it after this. There.
Exactly.
I know exactly what to delete, just to delete my voice track.
Welcome back. We're talking about deleting each other. This is the games with and James.
This is the game with boop and boop.
Insert your name here.
Spoiler warning. Neither one of us survived this episode.
It was the podcast wars, and they eliminated us.
No, I'm just reminded there's an Aqua Teen episode where it's like, oh my god, it's off the Tarboard Bow, ladies and gentlemen. Giant, microscopic tar monsters. I'm gonna have to go off and fight them, ladies and gentlemen. Wish me luck. All right, I scared them off with my nudity. I'm feeling a little sexy. Who wants to feel sexy with the captain? and just describing that, like auditorily. I was gonna say sonically again, but I know you don't like that word.
It's weird, man. But I mean, actually, it's appropriate for this episode.
Sure, but not to get sidetracked too much. But yeah, I think it's funny describing visual things on like a radio show, where it's like, and then he got trapped in the hole, and the hole was very deep, and there was some water in it, so it splashed a little bit. We could have made sound effects, but no.
In the long, dark history of consoles, Nintendo, the card company, had been around since the 1800s with no competition whatsoever in their weird card game thing.
Hanafuda cards?
The Hanafuda Wars.
The Hanafuda Zaibatsu.
Now,
No, they're Nintendo. It was like the Mashima, Heihachi Mishima, the Mishima Zaibatsu of video games. They ruled with an iron fist, and everyone knew it.
on this day in 1940,
You can't
Sega,
do this the entire show.
You want to bet?
I will stop recording. I will just hit space, and I will fold my arms, take my ball, and go home.
I'm allowed to do the intro this way, and that is all.
Anyway,
Sega originated in 1940.
I am literally going to stop.
And ironically,
Thank you.
it was Standard Games. It was a coin-operated game company.
Service games.
Fair. Coin-operated service games company actually based in Hawaii.
Yes.
So Sega, as you know it, ladies and gentlemen, so start of Sega's history, was literally an American-owned company originally. So while it was providing games for military bases, the company, which was known as Standard Games, moved eventually to Japan in 1952. And that is when we will say Sega kind of truly launched. So it was renamed Service Games of Japan.
Oh, yeah.
Because, as you know, Japan didn't want to associate with America after we atomic bombed them. Good reasons.
Is it the... Yes.
So I mean, it's kind of, so I don't know a lot of Sega history. So in deep diving with this, like I am scouring notes, ladies and gentlemen. I am looking from multiple sites, from Britannica, Sega.co UK history, and all that other stuff. Like you name it. I didn't just want to use wikis because that's kind of cheating.
I mean, it's the ultimate way to do it. Check out Wikipedia. Not sponsored by Wikipedia.
We do not support this message.
Could you imagine if Wikipedia sponsored things?
That would be nuts and awesome at the same time.
Because I think it would just encourage wiki vandalism.
Wikilism?
That sounds like fun.
But so this has been really refreshing to kind of deep dive into John's vein of history, because when it comes to Sega, John basically has a marriage of knowledge for this console that surpasses my marriage of knowledge on JRPGs if we look at it in an equivalency.
I think being a fan of something doesn't necessarily qualify you to be like a historian on it. But I remember I did go, when I went through my college years and when I went through my game design program, one of the initial like intro courses was like understanding core concepts of game design, and it explored things like history and like play dynamics and stuff, and I was the one always raising my hand to answer questions.
By the way, this is 1975.
I like how I became Volturo from the Harvey Birdman cartoon.
So, with the history of Sega, so after they transferred back to Japan, Service Games of Japan actually later merged with Rosen Enterprises to create Sega Enterprises.
What's funny about this is that what we've, in the span of 5 minutes, we've talked about how this company was founded and merged / moved / consolidated. This is going to be a thing that occurs throughout the entirety of Sega's history.
So buckle up. It's a bumpy ride.
Yeah, they have rubbed elbows with so many developers, so many publishers, so many manufacturers and chip makers and other companies. It's kind of funny how Sega has its hand in everything.
Now here's your fun, we'll say trivia night blurb. Sega, so after they had merged and created Sega Enterprises, right? What hit them off with popularity in 1965 was the release of the arcade game Periscope.
Yep.
Periscope was their first dive truly into the video game world, if you think about it.
Yeah, it's in the same way that a lot of these early companies were in the amusement business. And so it was things like slot machines and jukeboxes and stuff, but also things like pinball machines and the burgeoning video game market, like pub games and stuff.
It's wild to think about. So I had never heard of the arcade game Periscope, so I was like, I want to check this out. So scour the YouTube, scour the interwebs.
And it looks like something out of a goddamn Speed Racer cartoon.
I was like, what is this nonsense?
If you look at those old cabs, it's the same thing if you go and play old pinball machines. Just the way that they were made is so weirdly artisanal, but also so archaic that it's how did these even work? It's like staples, glue, and light bulbs.
It's like wings and prayers, wings and prayers.
That's pretty much it.
So that was So this information has been kind of rapid fire because it's just kind of little blurby. We want you to know where it starts because
we are not here to read like verbatim the entries across like Wikipedia and stuff like that. Like that's not what we're here for.
Now, Sega's heyday started in the 80s.
Yes.
So we're going to fast forward time. We hit the early 80s. Sega Enterprises Incorporated at the time was a subsidiary of Gulf Plus Western. Do we want Gulf and Western or Gulf Plus Western? I don't know. Whatever that company is.
The Gulf Plus. It's like the oil company?
Yeah, it's Gulf Plus Western.
Wow.
I deep dove this knowledge, man.
I'm seeing the notes, yes, but at the same time I'm like, this is what I'm saying by like their weird associations with other different companies. Like the fact, because if you told me that they like worked with like Bally Midway, it'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense because they're an amusement visions type company. But when you tell me Gulf and Western, I'm like, what, the oil company?
Yeah, it's wild. So in the early 80s, they were one of the top 5 arcade cabinet manufacturers. So Sega, with Periscope, met some success. They operated how they normally operate for the next 15 years. But once the 80s hit, like 1982, they created Zaxxon.
Yep. They started creating their own games, which is also really funny because if you look at some of the initial Frogger arcade cabinets, they have Sega on them because they were a distributor when Konami wasn't.
It's wild to think about that. So this company, to put this into perspective, so back between July 1981 and June of 1982, so Zaxxon has come out, Sega actually surpassed $200 million in company revenue here in the United States. And they're not even a really big factor when all things are considered at this time in the home video game market. They were slaughtering those arcade cabinet sales.
Yep.
A majority of arcade cabinets in the early 80s arcades, they were Sega arcades.
Yeah, because Sega has a hand in so many of that manufacturing and distribution that they're synonymous with arcades to this day, that up until recently, the arcades in like, Akihabara and Ikebukuro and stuff like that, like when they removed the Sega names on that was the end of a true era.
It's wild to think about. And unfortunately, so one of the many weird mergers happened after 1982. So the arcade business after 1982 started to take a dive because that's when we started to see more of the advent of the home consoles.
Freaking Atari comes out with a home Pong machine and suddenly everybody's on the gold rush to make stuff for the home.
And that's what led Gulf Plus Western or Gulf and Western, whatever you want to call it. You interpret Gulf Western how you want.
GW. How about we call it GW?
The GW Kids Show.
Yeah.
But they sold it to Bally Manufacturing. They sold their rights.
Yeah, and that makes sense to people who hear that name. Yeah, because Bally, Midway, arcades, pinball.
100%. So that company, Bally was actually very smart. Bally decided to say, we want to they retained the North America R&D operation, and they also retained the Japanese subsidiary Sega Enterprises Limited, Ltd. And when you think about it, that was like a big blockbuster move, right? At that time, Sega Japan could have went the way of the dodo because their primary focus was still North American R&D. So Bally saved Sega of Japan in 1982.
Sega has always been an underdog company. It's kind of crazy how, as we've looked through these notes and explained the history, it's like, yeah, like they're always just kind of around because they're so synonymous with gaming. It's the kind of same stuff that happens when like Nintendo wanted to bring the Nintendo over and they approached Atari. They were like, hey, you're synonymous with games. We want you to be the face of our entertainment system. And it's like, no. Like, what do you mean, no?
No, not today.
This is going to take over the world. I guess not. Well, we're going to do it anyway.
Now, it was at this time. So Sega already knew the arcade business was in decline, right? And at this time, their president, I'm probably...
Hayao Nakayama.
Hayao Nakayama. He finally was like, hey, let's use our leverage. Let's use our hardware expertise because they were second to none when it came to cabinet expertise on the hardware. Their arcade cabinets hardware outperformed almost everyone else's.
Yep.
So he was like, you know what? It's time to get into that home console market in Japan. Because at the time, in the early 80s, it's still in its infancy.
Yep.
Like
in America.
Yeah, like early 80s, the Famicom still wasn't around.
Yeah. But the frickin', again, I guess I mentioned in passing the home Pong consoles and stuff. Look at some of the original Nintendo TV game 6s or 16s or whatever. They're just consoles that play one or two specific games, which more than likely are just Pong, and they plug right into your TV. That's what home gaming was.
Yep.
It wasn't the idea, the advent of cartridges, until the Channel F came around. Nuh-uh.
It was the Wild West. So early 80s, like, if ladies and gentlemen, if you can imagine it, any idea could stick. Because
like the Chase the Chuckwagon dog food video game for Atari. Buy it now.
that, or when Mario was on Atari.
Oh, licensing and stuff?
Yeah.
Because, again, there was no such thing as the Nintendo, so they're like, well, how are we going to get these arcade games to Atari? I know.
Fun fact, we had Tetris for Atari.
Really?
Yep, with the old Russian...
Oh, are you talking about the arcade stuff? Yep, I remember that.
So we had that. It's the early 80s, it was lawless in a way that allowed for ingenuity, like Nakayama, to shine, because here currently in today's society, like today's climate, I almost said society. Like today's climate of gaming, it is very cut and dry, cookie cutter. It's experimentation is very limited to potentially quality of life or a little mechanic here or there. It's not revolutionary. Like the PlayStation 5, it's awesome. It's not revolutionary. The Xbox Series X, it's awesome. It's not revolutionary.
I think it's because of just the nature of the market is so big, to the point where I think the biggest swing I've seen in recent history has been the Intellivision Amico, and I am still
waiting for it.
I'm kind of just pouring one out for it because I'm like, I want you to succeed, little man, but I don't know.
You up against a lot. Don't go the route of Google Stadia.
Yeah, because even still, Google Stadia as a service, like their overhead's still pretty low, so they can still host a service. It's like, I mean, Amazon's doing it with Luna.
I mean, hell, Netflix has gaming now.
Kill me.
But the early 80s, every innovation and creativity were key to success. It's why...
Do you remember? I mean, I don't remember vividly because when I'm saying remember, but like this was an actual accessory you could buy for your ColecoVision. It was a converter that allowed you to play Atari cartridges on your ColecoVision, or I believe it was the Intellivision. Could you imagine if there was an add-on for consoles now where it's like, hey, you like PlayStation games? Here's an adapter you can plug into your Xbox or your Switch to play PlayStation games.
I would appreciate that, because...
But do you have any idea how insane that would be to hear
it would
now?
It would be balls ass insane, because you know as well as I, Sony won't budge. Microsoft won't budge. It, like, literally, it's like...
But imagine if they did it anyway.
If they did it anyway, I would be tickled pink. Could you imagine? No, the big one. You like your Xbox? You like your Switch? Now you can play Switch first-party games on your Xbox.
I would literally kill for that.
Bye-bye!
Because I would be playing Splatoon 3 with my Xbox controller, and I'd be killing all these bad kids who are like, well, I can't use the motion controls. I'm like, yes.
Johnny, no!
Yes, gatekeeping. The bad guy is winning.
But...
I haven't used that one in a while.
So... Back in the 80s, so as we just mentioned, Nakayama, he pitched the idea. And Sega, they decided to run with it. So on July 15th, 1983, John's not even an idea yet. I am definitely not an idea yet, because this is 3 years before my time. Sega actually released their first console system, the SG-1000.
And if you've seen pictures of that thing, it's adorable. It's an adorable little toy.
And again, they hit success. So their total revenue on that before closing out was more than $200 million. And
that's American dollars.
And the really mind-blowing thing, like their initial unit order, so I didn't include that in the notes, but it just brain blasted me, was 160,000 units, right?
Right.
They sold the initial in such a fast time it caused, hey, we need more. Hey, we need more. Hey, we need more.
That's a recurring thing with Sega as well. Because the Dreamcast had a very similar, like, rocket fire start.
Give and and it's gone.
It's gone.
And it's gone.
I mean, if you're selling like 50,000 units a day, Like, you're doing good, but sometimes it just goes to show that the game industry just got so big that you couldn't have a sustainable company selling almost 100,000 units a day.
Yeah, like that. Oh my God, could you imagine that?
I don't have to. It happened. But yeah, so they got into the home console business before so many of these other Japanese companies did.
Yeah, like so the Famicom came out in Japan July 15th, 1983, right?
The Famicom did?
Yeah.
Or the Master System?
No. The Famicom and the Master System had a same-day release.
Oh, wow.
July 15th. It's
the Coke and Pepsi of video games.
Yeah. Like, how wild is that? Like, I just learned. I didn't know they literally released same day. Did you know that?
No, I didn't, because I didn't live in Japan ever as a child, and I wasn't even alive when those consoles came out.
So, obviously, we all know the success of the Famicom. From 83 to arguably the release of Super Mario Bros. 3 into the Super Famicom, Nintendo dominated the world market.
Yeah.
Like, at one point, 70% of market share was them.
That was because, are you talking about worldwide marketing in 85?
So,
worldwide market share in 85, I meant to say.
Well, from the advent of the Famicom,
yeah,
to 1991,
to like the launch of the Nintendo in America.
No, to 91.
Oh.
Like,
for some reason I wasn't hearing the 91.
Yeah, so we're talking 83 to 91. Nintendo basically strong-armed the world and dominated everything. And the fact that Sega, even in that dominance with their initial console launch, 200 million in revenue, that's awesome.
Yeah, and the fact that market share that we're talking about, and this is probably the most like hard gaming facts we'll ever get on this show. The fact that so much of the market of the early to late 80s was Nintendo, it only made it more amazing when Genesis came in and sweeped everything and took over like everything with the Genesis.
It's insane. So Sega met with success. I don't care what anybody says. That much revenue for your test into the console market in the Famicom days.
And then you release 2 other models, and then you make the Master System, and then bam.
Yep. And then October 20th, 85, the Master System comes out. And then it came out here in America, September of 86. They didn't actually have the date. I went everywhere I could. I could not find the actual date.
An actual launch date.
Which annoyed me. I was like, you've given me launch dates for everything else, research people, not this one? Thanks.
And no one knows.
But so met with even more success. So the Master System generated roughly 260 million in revenue. So more success. And
I also want to, I don't want to keep interrupting you, but I also just want to throw out an argument to the straw people out there that I make up in my head. Because I recently wrote an article for our blog about the myth of objectivity and how better specs for your console doesn't make you a better console, because if it did, the Master System would have beat the Nintendo hands down by just being a straight up faster, better sounding machine.
Yep. Better technology.
Yep.
So
they had fast processing even in then.
So the Master System releases. So both Japan and North America, they obviously purchased it if it made 260 million in revenue, but at the time, you still couldn't break the worldwide stranglehold that was the Famicom.
It's just how it is. Sometimes you just get a foothold and you don't let go. And some of that is just cutthroat business practice. Other part of that is just having, more recognizable software. Because Alex Kidd was the competitor to Mario. And yes, it sold well on Sega consoles for people who knew what Alex Kidd was, but you're going to compare that to Mario?
Enough said.
I remember seeing the boxes, because they would reissue cartridge boxes and stuff if things made 1 million sellers, right? So 1 million, 2 million in sales is nothing to sneeze at, especially in the mid 80s. But then you compare it to Mario Brothers, who has sold tens of millions of copies.
Yeah. that time frame, Nintendo couldn't be touched. And I want to praise the genius that was Nakayama, right?
Mm.
So he realized 1987. So they've hit with success with that release of in 85 for Japan, 86 for America. They've got to see how the layout of the land goes. They've got to see how the market's going. So in 87, that's when we started to get that peak development time happening. And I even mentioned this to John before the episode. So 87 hits. Sega's kind of having another threat besides the Famicom.
NEC comes out.
Yep. With the PC Engine.
Yep. With the dumbest name for a console.
Right?
Next to the TurboGrafx 16, though, because they're both pretty bad names.
So to kind of stay competitive, Nakayama assigned a guy named Ishikawa and his team, in talking with them, they decided that we got what the Genesis had, that 16-bit microprocessor.
The System 16 arcade boards that they used in all of their games they put out, yeah.
Mm-hmm. The
Bonanza Brothers, Altered Beast, Golden Axe, baby.
Exactly. It's the same exact one in that Sega System 16. So this is what I want to, give a giant shout out to. So the decision was made to use, at the time, it was an advanced chip. It was the Motorola 68000.
Yeah.
At the time, that chip was expensive. And Sega at the time, their critical success, all the way up until the weird fallout we're about to talk about, they kept their console prices very low, right? They never wanted to drive console price up. And if they paid normal retail for that 68,000 chip, they were going to drive the console price up. So Sega, in a shrewd ability of negotiation with the distributor of this chip, got it for 1/10 of the price on a straight up upfront volume order, with the promise, we will continue ordering from you pending our console success. So they legit strong-armed a distributor that could have charged them.
They gave Yamaha and all these chip companies points on the back end.
Right,
that's what they did. They gave them a paid-in experience deal.
Now, that's genius. I don't care what anybody says.
That's very shrewd, business-like,
Sega doesn't have the best track record of shrewd business in its later history. Its early history, I don't care what anybody says. Sega learned, created a new console. Learned, created the console that almost took Nintendo down completely. For 4 straight years, at one point in the 90s, Sega had market share dominance.
They did. And then the Super Nintendo came out and they competed.
But Sega, they still couldn't beat Sega. Because so I want you to understand the sheer insanity of video game stores at the time. For every one Super Nintendo game, you had 10 Sega Genesis games. That's
what you get. That's what happens when you make your console. You put it out earlier, man. You get that foothold.
So after that shrewd business negotiation, here is the critical claim to Sega's success.
Their sound chip.
Hey!
I just wanted to chime in real quick. Shout out to the Sega sound chip, the Yamaha the YM2612 chip. I don't care what anyone says. That makes games sound fucking crunchy as hell, and I love it.
I've learned so much in deep diving Sega's history. This is awesome, and I'm really happy we're doing this. But what you, as our fans, really are chomping at the bit, because we've given you kind of a history lesson. This is Sega's critical success. October 29th, 1988. Mega Drive releases in Japan. And then August 14th. See, they gave me that date. August 14th, 1989, Genesis released in North America.
Yep.
So when they initially launched, Sega actually launched this. They knew at the time we're still not going to outpace the Famicom, which in Japan, they had access to the Super Famicom before we even could think of the Super Nintendo. Nintendo kind of botched their own thing at first with a little bit. So if you look at the history of Super Mario World, Super Mario Bros. 3 comes out, and they're already talking about Super Mario World. So back then you didn't have interlinking like journalism.
We talked about this in the previous episode, but the idea of companies operating autonomously from each other, and the fact that there was an American branch and a Japanese branch that were just on the completely different page. Because when you are the HQ of your company, of course you're going to have all the details and all of like the design stuff and trade secrets and all that stuff happening. But you're absolutely right about like, yeah, Mario 3 just came out. We can't talk about Mario 4 yet because why? We're selling 3 right now.
And to add to the confusion in North America, so you as a gamer in North America at the time, you got little bits of you get tidbits from Japan. So it's like, oh, look at Super Mario 3.
Look at the Virtual Boy. Look at the Ultra 64. Yeah.
And Nintendo's faux pas, and this is just opinion, but I think it is also
this
kind of
entire
fact.
show is opinion.
Well, this episode is actual hard facts.
Yeah.
Kind of is, right?
Sure.
This is our one factual episode. You get one.
This is the only time we've ever told the truth on this show.
But like Nintendo kind of stumbled over themselves because here in America, they started to get the sneak peek of the next console as well as Super Mario World. So it kind of created confusion in North America. It's like, well, we want to play Super Mario Brothers 3, but do we even do that? Do we just wait for this new console? So,
and also you had the competing messaging of independent journalists against Nintendo's own. Nintendo Power was basically just Nintendo. I don't want to use the word propaganda because it sounds nefarious, but it really was. It was basically Nintendo's mouthpiece company.
Exactly.
It was
Nintendo
the company newsletter. It's the kind of stuff that when you get any old magazine, like when you were part of the, quote, Star Wars fan club back in the day, or the Star Trek fan club, it was a catalog.
100%. So Nintendo slip up with that. So Super Mario Bros. 3, critical commercial success for Japan. If you were a gamer, you got, and you wanted to be the it kid, you had Super Mario Bros. 3. Mm-hmm. Sega knew they weren't touching that, right?
Sega, how could they?
Sega played the long game. So in their North America market, so pre-Tom Kalinske, so it was the former Atari Corporation Entertainment.
In the year 1989, TK.
Yep. So it was the former Atari Corporation Entertainment Electronics Division president. Man, that is long.
That is a huge division.
That is a giant title.
That's like being a junior executive vice president of marketing and, social networking.
So this person, who is Michael Katz, was named as the new Sega of America CEO. He started a 2-part approach to build sales in America. Part 1 was that marketing campaign. If any of you have ever seen these commercials, you will truly appreciate it. So it's a marketing campaign to challenge Nintendo head on and emphasize the more arcade-like experience. So gamers were growing up in North America. They had started on the Famicom. They were kind of wanting to kind of grow up. It was kind of, hey, that's the kid machine. So that was awesome. That was a perfect marketing ploy.
Yep. Everything that you can think about in terms of the actual, everything you can say about the Sega Genesis, whether or not you think it's the better console or had the better games or not, their marketing was on point.
And that's where, so with Michael Katz, we got slogans. The most iconic one, Genesis does what Nintendo don't.
16-bit graphics.
Nintendo at this time, they didn't have to do any marketing against anyone. They didn't have to say my system's better than yours. They just owned it. Like Nintendo had built themselves up so big at the time. They just had pure market share.
Yeah.
And that was genius. And now here's the big genius. I have to turn it over to John. It's kind of weird. I've been guiding the Sega episode. Like, I'm actually letting my inner fan of history out.
I'll get the second half of this episode. Don't worry.
So, now, that starts off with Michael Katz. Super Mario Bros. 3, it's hit Japan. Americans are having to wait forever and a day because it also got delayed. Super Mario Bros. 3 got delayed going to America.
Did the Super Nintendo.
Exactly. So, in mid-1990, and arguably the best decision ever, Nakayama hired, who everybody knows, Tom Kalinske.
TK.
To replace Katz as the CEO. So Kalinske didn't exactly know much about the video game market at the time, but he was a genius in that, well, I don't know about video games as much as I should. I am going to get myself surrounded by industry savvy advisors. And I think that was huge because if you look at Nintendo,
the Clinton approach,
right? I mean, if you look at Nintendo, like arguably the pioneers, Miyamoto and all of them, right?
Yeah.
They knew it, they were running it, but once they were so dedicated to the development of the games that Nintendo was kind of a two-headed beast at the time.
Really?
So think about it. Like Miyamoto just wanted to develop games for the longest of time.
Yeah.
So he didn't really care about the politicking.
That's why frickin' I should know his name. I really feel terrible. The guy who was the CEO of Nintendo for the longest time.
Toshohiro Yakayama!
Stop it. It was Hiroshi Yamauchi. That's why he was the guy who understood the business and turned to people like Gunpei Yokoi and Shigeru Miyamoto and all those guys who made those initial run of games and said, like, you guys might not know it, but you guys are the future, so let's work on that. So it takes different types of people. It's the Iwerks and Walt Disney approach, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And as a product of Nintendo I'm just gonna say it, they got complacent and rested on their laurels. I mean, there was no reason for them not to, right?
Well, it's funny you say that because the entire reason the Super Nintendo began development was because of Yamauchi's concerns with the incoming Genesis and TurboGrafx/PC engine.
But he was, if you remember, he kept being met with, we don't have to worry about this.
And then he was told that, but at the same time, it's Japanese companies work a very top-down way.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, you can advise, but it's eventually going to be decided by the who has final cut. And he is the one who says, I still think we should develop this. We can slow it down, but we still need to develop it. So
now, Kalinske, so there's a business model that's called the razor and blades model. It's a very aggressive approach to business. So
very American.
Right? For him, it was a 4-process plan.
Yep.
Cut the price of the console, create an American team to develop games targeted at the American market, which genius because we are a different market at the time than Japan.
Yeah, it's the reason why Sonic is so successful in America.
Expand those aggressive advertising campaigns, Nintendenesis with like all that. And then this was the game changer. So the original pack-in game was Altered Beast.
Yep.
That got changed to arguably everybody's favorite mascot. Fuck you, Mario.
Whoa!
Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yep.
Mario sure, he's bigger.
If you were like me and you didn't understand why the cartridge said not for resale, it's because that was the bundle version of Sonic. Sonic was also sold independently outside of the bundle. But if you got the bundle one, it said not for resale. I'm like, what's that mean? So
they had created Sonic the Hedgehog, brand new mascot to compete with Mario.
It was, and that's worth an episode on itself, like the history of just Sonic's creation and how it happened. But yeah, it's crazy to think that was such a concern where it's like, okay, we need to compete with Nintendo. How are we going to do that? Well, platformers are it. Let's do it.
Now, Japan tried to be Japan. So initially, the Japanese board of directors for Sega, they were like, I'm not a big fan of this plan. But Nakayama literally approved all 4 points. And then he also told Kalinske, verbatim here, got the quote, because this is awesome.
Yeah.
I hired you to make the decisions for Europe and the Americas. So go ahead and do it.
Yep. It's interesting to imagine that there was a spirit of collaboration in that kind of capacity, which I think is very pioneering. Again, we like to project and we like to say things without really knowing the exact reasons why. But when it comes to just differing cultures, that's really an unheard of thing. So when you have someone who's like, hey, you're the head of this branch of our company, I might be in charge of the entire thing, but I'm going to let you do your thing. Again, I'll say it again. I'll parrot the same thing we've been saying. The idea of 2 branches of the same company operating completely autonomously of one another is such an amazingly weird concept to really think about.
So, in doing this plan, critics praised Sonic as one of the best games yet made, and Genesis sales, they shot through the roof because here's the reality of it. Customers, they've been waiting for the release of the international version of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, your SNES.
Did you know anybody who actually called it the SNES?
No. I think that just happened later. I think...
Because I never did. I never did either.
I just know...
I heard it called the SNES or the Super Nintendo. No one ever called it a SNES.
I always heard the SNES, and then I think it was the YouTuber... So my first time hearing SNES was with that YouTuber, SNES Drunk.
Yep, because he's drunk. But anyway.
But because of that... Why am I going to wait for this when I have access to that?
There was literally a commercial that explained that, where it's just like, hey, here's this new Super Nintendo system. What's that thing? That's Sonic, and it's $50 cheaper. It's like, yeah, that they knew how to market their system.
So because of Sonic the Hedgehog, so the price point, awesome. All the marketing and everything, great. But it was Sonic who drove the Genesis and he was the driver of the Genesis. And it actually outsold. So the Super Nintendo hit the United States in 1991.
Yep.
So the Genesis has already been out for 3 years at this time.
Yep.
And because of that aggressive tactical approach by TK, Tom Kalinske, I almost went into the DK rap there. I was like, wait, no, it's TK, not DK.
Tonky Tonk.
Because of that, during the 1991 holiday season, they outsold the Nintendo 2-1. And Sega, by January 1992, so literally the next month, actually had a 65% control of the market for 16-bit consoles.
They dethroned Mario.
And this was the first time Nintendo had not been the console leader since 1985. Let that sink in. That is a 7-year stretch of pure I win.
Yeah, over half a decade.
So from 1991, for the next 4 holiday seasons, due to their 2-year lead that they already had in North America, right? So 89 in America, and they controlled Christmas. Their game library was insane. And as I mentioned, they had 10 games for every one Super Nintendo game. Now, here's the hilariousness of their genius. Super Nintendo comes out with an exclusive Final Fight.
Made by Capcom.
Sega internal development team was like, oh, that's cute. Here's Streets of Rage.
Well, that's interesting too, and an interesting difference in the culture of Sega versus things like Nintendo, because Nintendo was very chummy with their licensees and, people who would develop games for them. So Nintendo would make their own games, sure, but they had plenty of relationships with other companies like your Konamis and your Capcoms, your Squares, that would make games for their platform. And that was the continued expectation. Like, if you were going to make a Super Nintendo, we're going to have a platform for you to make your games for us. And Sega were the people who were like, we'll just make our own. And then it kicked ass.
It did. So that means, if you're tracking, 4 straight Christmases, that means the Genesis dominated the market until 1995. And it's here, ladies and gentlemen, that as I've been leading this show, I have to take a back seat. So when we return for the second half of Sega's history,
the Dark Ages, John
is your conductor on this train leading to a magical journey. So toot toot! We'll be right back.
Come on, ride the train. And crash it.
Train. Oh, no, pile drive it.
Come on, ride the train. Oh, God.
Sabin, pile drive.
You're editing this one, so you can either put the Genesis Does music or that train fight music in here. But all right, we'll be right back, folks. We're going to tell you about the 32X.
Come on, ride the train. The Sega. Sorry, I'm having to get off here because the train wreck has arrived.
I'm getting off before this train crashes. Yeah, it does pretty hard. So after pretty much trading places with Nintendo and a half decade of market dominance and stuff, a lot of things just started to sour immediately as the decisions made at a higher level at Sega began to clash with each other. This is the last time I will bring it up, but again, Sega of America and Sega of Japan were very different companies, and they had very different ideas of what Sega should be in the future. So there was, from Sega of America, their perspective was to continue supporting the Genesis, which is, fine because it's still a fine console even in the 90s with other consoles coming out. That's why some of the last games made for it came out in like 1997, 1998, similar to the Super Nintendo. Those freaking 16-bit consoles had legs. They really did.
They did.
But some of the decisions began to sour with a lot of people who were, their customers and their fans. I need only look in a similar vein that we saw a misstep in Nintendo with the Virtual Boy. Sega launches the 32X as a gateway to 32-bit gaming and 32-bit platforms with Sega. As Sega is at the same time developing the Sega Saturn, which I think his name was Scott Bayless, who was working at Sega at the time, because these quotes are out in the ether, but he's like, we had two concurrent consoles competing essentially with each other, and it made us look greedy and stupid to our customers. You can't do that. That was one of their first big missteps.
So we have to give Nintendo credit here in the sense that the Super Nintendo, like, as it evolved, it was actually a 32-bit console.
It was definitely the benefit of not launching. The benefit of more development time is that, this is what all the nerds talk about when they talk about objectively better consoles. Like, yes, better resolution, better sound, better whatever. It can do more pretty things with graphics.
So you saw games like Donkey Kong Country, the very first one hit. And
I'm wondering if you could make that run on Genesis, though.
You probably...
you know how I know? Traveler's Tales and Toy Story. Got them.
They probably could. I mean, here recently, I forget who it was, somebody had reverse engineered Sonic into a Super Nintendo cartridge to play on the Super Nintendo.
I remember seeing the footage of that, and it made me sad, but at the same time I was like, I want to play it.
It makes you sad because it's like, oh, but at the same time it's like, that's impressive.
Well, yeah, because it's marketing aside, like, there were differences to the hardware that made substantive differences to how you develop it. That's why multi-platform games were different between both consoles. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
And then Sega also, let's not forget, they made another dumb mistake. Mm-hmm. They tried to compete with Nintendo in the handheld market with the Game Gear.
The Game Gear it still competed. It wasn't, a 100 million seller that had Tetris on it, but it still had, you got the Sega Experience Portable.
You did, but it became that three-headed monster. Game Gear, 32X, Sega Saturn, right?
Yeah.
That is a three-headed nightmare.
This is the funniest thing about Sega. So in the 90s, they felt like they were untouchable. So just because of their complete
dominance
and ballsiness, in some markets, you had the Sega Genesis, you still had the Master System, you had the 32X coming, the Saturn was also coming. They also had other software that they did, like Pico, which was an educational tool. They had Game Gear, and they had all their arcades. So really, that's about 6 to 7 platforms operating concurrently within the span of 10 years. That is an absurd level of, like, market saturation, to the point where, in the same vein where the Wii U was not working for Nintendo, but the 3DS was doing way better, people had to ask the question where it's like, okay, the Wii U is essentially competing with itself, because why would I make a Wii U game when I can make a 3DS game that could sell to tens of millions more people?
Yeah, Sega realized, like, Sega making that decision without consulting. And what I mean by that decision, it's the decision of hardware is not our future. Sega of Japan made that decision without including, let's be real, I don't care what anybody says, Sega of America is the reason that company never folded.
It's interesting because both companies were aware of each other and wanted and like said, okay, well, if we make choices here, it shouldn't affect the American branch so much. It's like, no, these are worldwide companies. Again, this was still a time where you could make a console or a video game that only releases in one market and it could make you money, right? So that's why the idea was like, okay, the Genesis is still really popular, so it would totally make sense to prolong the life of the Genesis, right? But Sega was like, oh, we should probably make a new console to support our current, System 32 games. And it was still part of a culture that was looking to only focus on software as opposed to hardware. And that's why even today I was doing research on this, on this topic. The amount of times that they were looking to partner, even in Sega of America, they were looking to partner with other companies and other people to offload some of the expense of manufacturing consoles and developing hardware. The fact that Sega went to both Silicon Graphics and Sony to compete with Nintendo and ended up with both of those decisions biting them in the ass because Silicon Graphics eventually got work with Nintendo and made the Nintendo 64, and the Sony partnership that fell through basically gave them the blueprint to make the PlayStation, their own PlayStation.
If Sega could have pursued that just a little bit harder, because we were going to get the Sony Nintendo or the Nintendo PlayStation, whatever it was, right?
The Sony Nintendo.
There are 2 prototypes in existence with the disc drive. Nintendo 64s with disc drives.
You mean Super Nintendos?
No. Nintendo.
Oh, the DD?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the Nintendo? Are you talking about the Super Nintendo PlayStation add-on thing? Because that's true history. Because if there is a Nintendo 64 that has PlayStation support, holy crap!
No, you can't actually play it. These are prototypes.
Right. So I think what you're saying is that yes, this is the Nintendo PlayStation with the SNES controllers and stuff, right?
I have to find this. So you keep going on with history.
So, again, it's a matter of history. The reason the 32X was created was because Hayao Nakayama was concerned about the Atari Jaguar. We mentioned this in our 16-bit episode, our top 10 Genesis games and stuff. The Jaguar was coming out, and they wanted something to kind of not to compete with it so it wouldn't cut into their market share, when really that was an ill-advised decision because the Jaguar was a piece of crap. So, yeah. Yeah, that's the Nintendo PlayStation. Yeah.
Yes, that. My bad. Yeah, there are 2 in existence that I know of, going for, on average, of $325,000.
Pocket change, I got that.
Now, if it was brand new, $1.4 million.
Can we start a Patreon and call it the PlayStation tier, where if you just give us that money so we can buy it? Anyway, but yeah, as history was, the mid to late 90s were a tumultuous time for Sega because they still operated in their very autonomous way, and it continually bit them in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
And so within that kind of weird, growing, like awkward phase of the Saturn, that's when they hired Bernie Stoller, and they made the choice to move away from the Saturn as quickly as possible and regain their consumer confidence by putting out a brand new console that is going to be cutting edge and be easy to program for and be the best thing that they actually wanted to make. Honestly, I think the Dreamcast, we're kind of brushing past it really quick because, I don't know, it's not as fun to talk about the hard times. But the Dreamcast was probably a better, more realized vision of what Sega of America wanted with their partnership with someone like Sony. A CD-based / GD-ROM-based console that supports 2D and 3D games really well. Because that's what they wanted. And PlayStation didn't want that. They only wanted to support 3D.
Yeah, I mean, Sony, despite the mess-ups, right? Sony still had that little bit of window with Nintendo and Sony's war, right?
Yeah.
Because Sony knew it. So
and Sony benefited the most out of this by basically having front row seat to Nintendo and all of the ways that they developed video games and the stuff they did.
So Sony goes to war with Nintendo, and the reason why is Nintendo being an idiot. Nintendo botched that relationship.
Yeah, partnering with Philips, we all know what came out of that. We don't need to touch that anymore. That has been done on the internet to death, and we will never talk about that.
Now, Sega, I'm going to say Sega of Japan, they almost brought the Saturn to a competitive level. They went back and they utilized the American approach with aggressive marketing with the Segata Sanchiro commercials.
We are never going to talk about the Saturn and not mention those commercials.
I challenge you, if you listen to this, look up Segata Sanchiro and watch those commercials. It is nuts. This dude is literally judo throwing and karate kicking and chopping, destroying Nintendo things. Ironically, his only weakness is club zombies.
Yep.
Doesn't make sense. And then the final farewell commercial, Nintendo launches a rocket at Sega of Japan, and he catches it against glass, propels it upward, and the farewell commercial was saving Sega.
Yep.
Which is what,
Isao Okawa ended up doing by giving him his money. But
like that campaign, when it launched, it was the perfect storm was happening. Sony's fighting Nintendo. Nintendo's fighting Sony. Mario 64. Final Fantasy 7 comes out. Crash Bandicoot.
Donkey.
Like, you name it, it is a slugfest between Nintendo and between Sony.
Yeah, the 3D generation of consoles, when 3D was really trying to be mainstream, that was a lot of people basically being like, what do we do? And a lot of people didn't know what to do, so we just threw shit at the wall.
That, in my opinion, was the second to last time Sega could have corrected course. But they ended that ad campaign too soon.
I don't think marketing is the sole reason that Sega exists or is remembered fondly. I really hope so.
No, you're 100% right. But fun fact for you, in deep diving some numbers, because I'm a numbers guy, from the start of that ad campaign to the final commercial with him blocking the rocket and him flying away, right?
Yeah.
So Saturn sales quintupled.
Nice. In Japan.
Obviously it flopped here because of the giant screw up that was 32X, Sega Saturn, simultaneous, get wrecked.
It was also the fact that they just launched it at the wrong time, and what was supposed to be a cool big E3 surprise of like, the Sega Saturn is here and you can buy it today. Like, that was supposed to be cool. But in a platform holder's 90s guy infinite wisdom, they didn't tell the people actually making their games. So that pissed a lot of people off. And then Sony can come up at their press conference at the same E3 and be like, $299, and then walk away.
Yep.
So again, all of the best intention, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
It is. Like, for all of their mistakes. So they hit the early 90s off tremendously and with authority. They were, both in Japan and North America, they were the premier console to play till 95.
And what's interesting too is that with the Saturn and it being so popular in Japan, it won Japan for the most part.
It did.
And I think that's so interesting because as someone who has gotten recently into playing Saturn games and trying to build their collection, I am almost exclusively looking at imports for all the games I want to buy.
I mean, you want to play Mega Man? Spend $1,000 or spend $20.
Spend $100 or spend $1,000. I know what I'm going to spend.
20. You can actually get it for 20.
Hit me with that link because I want that. But yeah, like just even doing like the shopping on eBay, that kind of stuff. I'm just like, I've gotten so many amazing games for my Saturn because they're imports, and I'm not saying that they're like related, but I'm just saying the fact that it's like the Saturn was successful to the point in Japan to the point where like you can tell in like the resale market why games are infinitely less expensive.
Absolutely. Also, speaking of adding to the collection, I got back into handhelds. I know this is a very random side quest in the form of DS and 3DS. I just acquired Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy IV Heroes of Light, Final Fantasy Tactics A2, Dragon Quest IX, Tales of the Abyss, The Alliance Alive, Radiant Historia, Bravely Second, and Fantasy Life. and an amazing deal. Amazing. So shout out to, I don't think you listen to the podcast, but shout out to a guy named Kyle Desjardins hooking me up for a price that can't be
You
beat.
mean Desjardins?
It's an I, not an A.
No, but it's a different name. It's like a French-Canadian name. It's Desjardins.
I mean, it could be, yeah, that.
Desjardins? What
Shut
the
up.
fuck are you talking about?
I'm just phonetically reading this guy's name.
Yeah, watch more hockey.
Fair. But no, I got back into retro, and it's through handheld. I am already up to almost 80 titles total between the two systems.
You can also thank your cousin. But anyway.
Woo woo! That is a Saturn.
Oh, that's going to be fun. We can play games. Yay. Anyway.
I know, we can play American games.
American games.
Hey, you'll play Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Oh.
You have to admit, you would try.
If now that we're saying it on the podcast, yeah. Like, if you're telling me I can play one of the most sought after video games for the platform, yes, I will play that game.
In a Peloponnesian minute.
In a Parisian macaroon.
Macaron.
Macron, like the president.
So I said this was one of the two last chances.
I'm glad we got to do that because this episode hasn't had a lot of zany in it.
I know, it's been very hard-hitting facts.
It's been very it's weird how it's like somber because like we know how the story ends and it's like, oh man.
On this edition of Nightly News, the death of Sega. Consoles.
I'm just imagine, you know how in the 90s they'd obscure people in black and change their voice?
I just want you to know, here at Sega, we tried so hard in order to make this work.
And I just picture that being Sonic. And it's like, no, if you could pay me in my chili dog copay, thank you.
Where's my rings?
Where's my gold?
So the reason why I mentioned, folks, that it was the second to last chance.
Mm-hmm.
Sega,
The last chance was...
they did what they did with the Mega Drive and the Genesis. They hit the market early with their magnum opus of consoles, the Dreamcast.
Yep, and it's funny because I think they tried to replicate a lot of what made the Genesis successful with the Dreamcast, and unfortunately, just whether it was the inner workings of the country, whether Japan just fucked them for some reason. No, it was. It was still a tumultuous time. They were still posting losses. They were still losing out, despite when Peter Moore was their president, because Peter Moore was the president of Sega of America until he was working at Microsoft, which is just crazy to think. I don't know what he's doing now. I know he was at EA for a while, but whatever. I like how I care about that stuff. But anyway.
Where are you, P. Moore?
Hey, P-Man, what's up? But I was going to say something. Like, the fact that, again, the shift was still trying to push towards software, and the Dreamcast was even something they didn't even necessarily want to make, but they knew that they had to in order to actually do the things they needed.
So, at this point in time, you have to figure the Nintendo 64 is out. Their Sega Saturn is out.
And done.
The PlayStation's out. The Saturn was discontinued, even in Japan, no less, to make way for the Dreamcast. So, at this point in time, with the titans of the industry being Sony and Nintendo, because the PlayStation, like, they were competitive. Yeah. Sony did what Sega was trying to do. Sony was able to...
Yeah, they had the blueprint from them.
Pile drive Nintendo.
Literally the blueprint.
So they were able to pile drive Nintendo, not only with just the PlayStation, but also the PlayStation 2.
Yep.
I mean, the PlayStation 2, till we see where the Switch goes, it's still the best-selling console of all time. That's insane to think about, right?
Yeah, I mean, even the Wii doesn't touch it. The Wii is the closest thing that Nintendo has ever gotten to touching it, and it still didn't.
Now, back to, rewinding time a little bit. So, the titans of the industry are in a heated battle. For Mario 64, there was Final Fantasy VII.
Kids are beating up each other on the playgrounds. It's madness.
For Ocarina of Time, you had Xenogears, Crash 3. It was...
We just had an episode about this. See previous.
We'll see our previous episode of...
Again, we need that little yellow box in comic books that says, see issue this for all the details.
So, Sega I will give them credit for this. I'm assuming that they realized, even though we're winning Japan, where we need a majority of our sales right now, because it's just pure loss in America at this point.
Mm-hmm.
They decided to make that last ditch unified front effort, right?
Yep.
In the Dreamcast.
What's also really funny about that in doing my research, and I knew about this stuff beforehand, but the reason why you didn't see any EA games on the Dreamcast was because Sega acquired Visual Concepts, the developer who also worked on Madden games and stuff before. They couldn't, according to Bing Gordon, which is the most freaking Tech Valley sounding name ever.
My name is Bing Gordon.
Hey, if you actually look at him, he is not that.
Hi, my name is Bing Gordon. Tell your mother about me.
You might have heard of a thing called 3DO. Yeah, that was me. No, that's Trip Hawkins. That's different. Anyway, no. But damn it, I'm getting all my handsome Tech Valley boys confused. No, but they couldn't give the same licensing deal that they gave to EA when like the Sega Genesis was the IT machine. And so EA was like, well, we're not going to make games for your platform. And Sega was like, fine, just like how we've always done it with our software, we'll just do it ourselves. And then they did, which later down the line became the ESPN 2K line of games.
Yep.
And that scared EA so much that they had to buy like Madden and NFL exclusivity because their games were competing too well. And they were $20.
So, initial launch of the Dreamcast. Japan went pretty well. With America, it was met with a lot of trepidation because you just burn us out with 32X Sega Saturn.
It was immediately popular. It was like a rocket ship. It was like, again, explosive debut. Like, we're out of stock, Sonic Adventure, Power Stone, all the arcade ports from Capcom, all this cool stuff that you're getting, House of the Dead, Sega Bass Fishing, all that. And then it just fizzled out.
So
it was
fizzled.
A supernova.
It was. What fizzled them out, though, was the dawn of the PlayStation 2.
Yeah, there was a lot of future forward looking that PlayStation 2 did. And it was also, again, the same market share stuff where it's like, hey guys, the Dreamcast looks cool, but hang on.
I think what hurt is they were 2 years before having to really think about DVD-based technology, right?
Well, yeah, and they also had their own proprietary disc because the GD-ROM technology and Mill CD and all sorts of stuff. All that, it's all technical bullcrap.
And Sony, because prior to the console stuff, right? They still had TVs. They were still an electronics-based company.
Funny enough, Sega did that too when they had reprojection televisions and they had folding bicycles and they had. That was really funny. I remember back in this was like a decade ago, and someone was reporting that they had like a portable media player with a little antenna on it that had a Sega on it, and I was like, Sega's got a new console. And it's like it's this cheapo like radio TV thing, and I'm like, screw it.
But Sony utilized the strength of their already existing electronic arm in order to realize, hey, home entertainment is what's critical. So the PlayStation 2 was the home entertainment system, for lack of a better expression.
They did what Xbox One tried to do better because its technology was in its infancy. You couldn't have Kinect yet.
So with the rise of the year 2000 hits, and that's when
millennium.
The death blow starts for the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
PlayStation 2 hits. You can go and look at video of people waiting in line for the PlayStation 2. There were people in New York waiting for 5 days.
Dude,
5 days.
Console launches are always hype as shit. So it's not exclusive to the PS2.
It wasn't, but the Dreamcast didn't do that.
But they also tried to replicate the success they tried to replicate what the Genesis did when it came to competitors. They were like, we'll drop our price, we'll focus on killer software, we'll bundle things, we'll really push hard. And again, like I said at the top of near the top of the episode, like you can only push so hard before the weight of just how much your expectations need to hit before it just collapses. And that's kind of sucks, especially because, again, those schisms between Sega America and Sega Japan come to head fully to the point where it's like, well, this house can't stand, we're changing direction.
Exactly.
And God, I have my Dreamcast that I got when I first got here.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that machine was the last pure fun machine when it came to video gaming. Like
Early PlayStation 2 was also very fun, but then it changed.
It's a matter of soul. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that there were bad games on either platform, but I think in terms of just down to its design, down to its marketing, down to the games that actually were like the flagship games on Sega consoles. Like we mentioned this in the 1998 episode and the Sega Top 10 episode. You have a very different soul when it comes to consoles. Nintendo, for the longest time, was the kid-friendly machine that had Mario and Zelda, but it was also the JRPG machine. Sega was very much a arcade port madhouse, because you'd get things like Altered Beast and Golden Axe and all the stuff that they did. Newcomers like Sonic the Hedgehog. And Sony and Nintendo kind of slotted into their own roles, and so Sega was always just the fun machine. And when that died, I feel like a lot of that kind of soul died with it.
Yeah,
and that sounds so morose, I know, but...
So they were... I mean, it does, but what I want you all to understand is the Dreamcast was still around at the launch of the PlayStation 2. As John mentioned, they tried to fight it, bundling, price discounts and everything, but it wasn't enough. And
online play with a 56K modem and a broadband modem, and you can play Phantasy Star on it, and Quake 3 Arena, and Unreal Tournament. And you can go to the Shenmue website and download wallpapers. I don't know.
They tried everything. So, January 31st, 2001, Sega announced to the world, by March 30th that year, so March 30th, 2001, we are discontinuing the Dreamcast.
2002, you mean?
No.
Oh, 21.
March 31st, 2001 was the date of discontinuation.
The last game I think that was released for it was NHL 2K3. A hockey game. Made by their own developing house of Visual Concepts, I believe.
So, the wild thing, I'll respect them for this last part. So, fun fact, after the discontinuation, they still honored their 50, roughly, it was like 50 to 60 titles that were still in production. They still honored that and published those.
Yep.
So, that's commendable. I mean, because it's literally in its death throes. But you're still going to honor commitments you made. Respect.
We still got Sonic Adventure 2, and that was, to me, that was like... I still need to buy a copy of that fucking game.
I think Henry got one in.
Is it in box with manual?
I can find out.
Is it Battle or is it Dreamcast?
Let me find out.
Okay. We'll talk about that after the show. Because I have a trip to make.
John's curiosity peaked. Well, he closes at 6.
Fuck. All right. I like how I'm actually mad. Like, he better have that tomorrow.
So, this has been the history of Sega. It's now, like, that was the death of it. Like, currently, I mean, games are still thriving.
The death of Sega is such a overplayed term because they're still around. And the reason we have Persona 5 is because of Sega.
The death of their console arm.
The death of the hardware, sure. Which is, again, which people actually were really excited about because they're like, oh, you mean I can get Sega games on every console? Awesome.
So
I can get Iron Man on the Wii and the Xbox? Sweet.
The Shining series is still here, so shout out Shining Resonance Refrain, the latest one. That's Sega.
The fact that
Soccer Awards, the one they released for the PS4. Sega. Every version of Sega Classics. Awesome shout out for people to still try Genesis Classics.
The entirety of the Yakuza franchise. Sega.
Mm-hmm. So they aren't dead, but they do what they've done better, and that's the software, that's the licensing, that's the partnerships, that's all the alternative forms of development to allow them to still be a successful company.
One of the weirdest mergers that I heard about that fell through for them was with Bandai. So could you imagine if that actually did go in a parallel universe that happened?
Sega!
Sega Bandai Namco.
Segamco. You have to combine them.
So
No, it's only cool if you combine them.
You could get a Sonic Gundam.
Bandega.
Bandego. That sounds like a slur.
You Bandego.
You take that back. My mom was a Bandego.
She worked in the pergola.
She worked in the in the bodega mines.
The bodega
In the bodega wars.
It blows my mind because they show, as a company, they showed, hey, we can learn from others' mistakes. We can be aggressive and capitalize on opportunity, because that's what the Genesis was. The Genesis was a capitalization.
You almost said Genos.
I know. Ew. Shout out One Punch.
Because he's listening. Saitama's listening right now.
One Punch! But no, so the Genesis was a product of Opportune Rising, as well as, just taking advantage of what's going on and shrewd thinking. And they turned away from it. And it sucks because, my opinion, so obviously we can't rewind time to redo this, but if Sega of Japan harmoniously worked with Sega of America to say, hey, my opinion, the 32X didn't need to exist.
No.
Did not. If they would have said, hey, this is awesome, but it's time for us to move to the next, put all that effort that was going into that 32X into the Saturn, giving it, because the 32X had like 2.5 years of development before coming out. Something like that, right? It wasn't like, plurp.
It really wasn't a slapdash idea. It was thoughtfully developed.
If you had all of that energy to make the Saturn a more friendly system to develop for, because developers as a whole will tell you the Sega Saturn was the hardest console to develop anything for.
It was, it's the way that it rendered graphics and stuff, and it was because it tried to be a 3D and a 2D machine. A lot of people didn't know how to develop for that. That's why a lot of games on it, it was a really great 2D machine. For a 3D, it was a bit harder to work for, but you could still get 3D games.
So if they would have put more time into it, I think they would still be around. We might have whatever their version of today was.
If you have more to say, please do.
Because, as you know, during the PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube comes out. That was not a success. Let's be real. The GameCube...
But neither was the Nintendo 64, really.
The 64 held on because of America. Like
20 million units versus, the 60 million units that the frickin' NES sold or SNES sold, It's... Nintendo was on a steady, slower decline until the Wii shot them back up.
Mm-hmm. So there was still ample opportunity if Sega had done things different to where they could still be in the console talks.
Well, here's my silver lining in all of that, and it's something that makes me still fucks with Microsoft a bit today. It's the fact that when Microsoft was a partner with Sega because they developed a operating system for people to develop games for the Dreamcast with it, and Bernie Stolar, the president of Sega of America at the time, who was responsible for the 9999 Dreamcast American launch stuff, right? He was like, we should let Microsoft buy us. That was one of the things that he recommended to the Japanese branch, was like, hey, if we want to only make software, Microsoft does hardware and software, we could work together. And we've already worked together to make an operating system, so why not? That didn't work out. But one of the things that was actually on the table for discussions when developing the Xbox was allowing Dreamcast games to be played on the Xbox. They wanted to have something there. Even in their death throes as a hardware company, they were like, we want our customers to go somewhere. And we don't want it to go to our competitors necessarily, so why not give it to Microsoft, because they're the new kid on the block.
Yep.
That's why if you look at the Dreamcast controller and the Xbox controller, the layouts for the A, B, X, Y are the same.
So that's been the tumultuous history, the rise, the fall, and the current of Sega.
So here's my question. What prompted you to encourage us to talk about this today?
So, in my infinite wisdom as our resident podcast genius,
I'll let you have that for right now.
The more we do episodes, so for you ladies and gentlemen, the more that we...
There are no ladies.
Hey, oh, man.
I think that's my favorite joke on YouTube. It's like, let me tell you guys, because it's always guys.
So we've been deep diving with years in review, fallen franchises, top 10s. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite YouTubers is the Gaming Historian, and when you look at it, video game history is very rich if you know where to look and you actually want to deep dive it.
Yeah.
And
you got to know your history.
Yeah, like, we're doomed to repeat our mistakes because, look, Nintendo messed up with the 64, Nintendo messed up with the GameCube, Nintendo messed up with the Wii U.
Yes, they did.
So if you think about it, that's 3 out of their 7 generations of console.
Yeah, that's like a D+ grade.
That failed.
That's a scrapings, yeah.
And we're doomed to repeat it if we don't recognize our failures, right?
Yeah, and for all the shit I give Sony, what I think is interesting is that they have stealthily or not been the market leader for the past, like almost 30 years.
Since 1996.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because even for all of the stuff that happened with the PS3 and how shitty of a platform that was to develop for if you didn't work for Sony, they, over time, outsold the Xbox, which is crazy for me to think about because I just remember the entire conversation was everybody played 360.
Yep. But at the end of it, they had 45% market share. That's insane.
Yeah, and it's really...
PlayStation 4, we don't even need to talk about that.
No, we don't.
Because, yeah, right?
Despite the fact that I didn't really play mine, I got Infamous Second Son, so I'm happy.
So
Can they make a new one, please?
I mean, eventually they will.
No, they won't. That's the thing that sucks. They won't. They'll make Ghost of Tsushima 2, and then they'll make something else, and it will never go back to Infamous.
Maybe. We are the podcast of cautiously optimistic, but I didn't fully.
That's the freaking motto of my life.
I didn't fully answer your question. We speak a lot of opinion here, right?
Yes.
And we speak a lot of fun kind of bantery from Meat Sponge to Sonic Heroes and everything in between.
Broad sweeping generalizations that only serve to make us more ideologically rigid. Yes.
So it's really nice to take a look at iconic moments in history because that history shaped us.
Oh, yeah.
For you, 100%. Me, I came to it secondary, but it still shaped some of my childhood. Like, to think that I forget who it was. Some random famous person has said, it's awesome to remember history, but it's even more amazing to live it. And you know who that person was?
Sonic.
Me.
I was gonna end on a bit more of a philosophical note and say that people think that they're born into this world. No, you come out of it.
Mm-hmm. So, as always, folks, I'm gonna leave us with that really cool moment. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. At Games with John and James.
That's a boomerang quote. It's hitting you now, isn't it?
On Twitter, at Games with JJ.
Games with J and J.
J and J, my bad.
Yep. Also, this episode won't be out in time for it, but stay tuned to the Twitter and the Instagram because I want to get our Twitch page started. And I want to do it this weekend with Splatoon 3. So, more info to come. I mean, it already happened, so it already came. More info to came. But be on the lookout for that this weekend, yo.
So,
or the recording. God, it's so weird playing 4D chess with myself. It's so weird.
What John is trying
What
to
I'm
say...
trying to say is I came.
What he's trying to say is, notice what we have talked about this past week on our Instagram and Twitter, because this past Sunday, we launched the Twitch. So streaming is happening, be it John by himself or with me together, chilling.
We'll figure it out.
We're going to make this happen. So
we have to play Sonic and the Secret Rings together, and you have to play it.
No, I've already played that game. And
you have to show it to the world.
No.
Because you need to experience.
So here's a fun fact for you. You want to know what my sister's favorite game was when she was a child on the Nintendo Wii? Guess.
I want to say Wii Sports so goddamn bad because that was everybody's favorite.
No, she loved Sonic and the Secret Rings. She thought it was fun to actually control someone running. And I'm like, oh, God.
Where is your sister now? What is she doing?
Well, she's an RPG kid now, so shout out Katrina. She did it right.
I'm trying to avoid saying heinous things because that's someone's sister. I don't want to do that. Yeah, namely your sister.
Everybody gets one, but in this case, none.
You get none because I will run you over with my car. Anyway.
No, but yeah, that was seriously her favorite game. And
when we're kids and don't know shit, that's fine.
I was subject to be the one playing that game.
And you heard that song every time you beat a level. Mr. Rainbow. Yeah, we'll play that again. Don't worry.
No, you will play that again.
You keep speaking things into existence. We're going to do that. If we're not going to play something fun, we're going to play that shit.
If we can't have fun, we just die.
If I can't have fun, I will deprive everyone else of fun. That's how I roll.
So
that's why if you see me playing Splatoon 3 and someone disconnects, guess what? That's me rage quitting. I'm dumbass on you, motherfucker.
So I'm James.
And I'm John, and I'm an asshole.
Apparently so. And this has been Games with John and James, Sega's history. Stay tuned because there's a lot of history out there. Sony, Nintendo, you name it. We want to, for all of our opinions, I want to give you some more facts.
And this has been Nick News with Linda Ellerby. And remember, if you don't know, ask.
Now I just want to say that even though Sega went away, they still provide me with rings and chili dogs.
Is this Witness Protection Sonic?
Yes. No, my name is...
My name is Craig Thompson.
My name is Sinnock.
My name is Sinnock. You mean the guy from Mortal Kombat?
No, that would be Shinnok. That's very racist of you.
Tails just comes over. It's like, hey, the car's ready. Oh, okay, I'll be right there.
No, that's Sliot.
Sliot. But it sounds like a car. All right.
I challenge you to say the other one's name backwards right now.
Snick. Hold on.
Are you actually gonna do it?
Hold on.
Do it. Do it.
This is how you end a professional episode. Slekuk? Slekunk. Yeah, that's how you say it. So if you want to make a new Sonicosi, there you go. Slekuk the enchilada. All right, that's enough. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
魂込めた一人の男が今日も行く真面目に遊ばぬ奴らには体で覚えさせるぞ